Kieron Concannon, you're very, very welcome to the podcast, and you're joining me from looks like a kind of a fancy enough studio setup there, which I suspect is somewhere around Killaloe, County Clare. Maybe you could describe your surroundings there, the internal and external.
Great to see you, Rory. Delighted and deeply honoured to be a guest on your podcast, firstly. So I'm sitting in a spare bedroom in my house in Ogonolloe, just outside Killaloe. And having been in music and the music business and recording nearly all my life, this bedroom has kind of morphed into a little project studio. And it also houses all my guilty secrets, because looking from wall to wall, I can see a multitude of strange and exotic instruments here. And I don't know why that makes me feel guilty.
Maybe because you're not, I'm going to take a punt and say you're maybe not playing them as much as you would like to. Could that be it?
No, it's not quite that. I try to make regular use of nearly all of them.
Okay.
Wherever possible. I just think I see myself in a deeply privileged position, from the kid who started off with a cheap Chinese harmonica to a room full of this is my wildest dreams come true, Rory.
Okay.
Surrounded.
So are you like contending with some sort of post-Catholic or present Catholic guilt syndrome around you're living your best life and you feel bad about it?
Yeah, you can take the boy out of the church, but you can't take the church out of the boy. And my background growing up in the UK was very much around the church, the Catholic church and school. And so I did guilt really, really well. I got first class honours in guilt, and I'm still dealing with those issues.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if it's fair that gets thrown around, and I just throw it around that it is attributed to Catholicism. But aside from that, and regardless of that, often many people struggle to enjoy and not feel this, like, what is guilt about? And I suppose, like, we're here to talk about art and music and creativity. In many ways, it's about being present in the joy and the flow in the experience, and not getting caught up in these other realms of the mind that can pull at us. Is there anything in that speaks to you?
Yeah, totally. So on the periphery, that guilt is always lurking. But when you step into the process and the music making, that dissipates straight away.
Yeah.
But I would also say I don't want to go off onto in a different trajectory here entirely, but I still think that my association, those early years of association around the Catholic Church, still leads to my even today the way I struggle and fight against authority figures. I still think that there's a Roman Catholic priest in my head wagging his finger as a voice of authority. And when I run up against authoritarian figures, it kind of takes me back to that early experience of somebody pointing their finger and telling you that you are born into a vale of tears.
Woo! That's a pretty heavy image. Well, okay. You've referred a couple of times now to your upbringing, so let's go there and maybe let's make the Irish link within that as well, in terms of where the migration happened and with who and how it all came to be. So I suppose specifically within that, then, like, who were your parents? Where did they come from? And what kind of place did you grow up in?
Okay. My mother was from a tiny little village just outside of Dingle in Kerry, a little place called Ballinlough. Like many people in those days, they made their way to the UK to find work and to better themselves. My dad grew up on the family farm in Roscommon and had a very difficult relationship with his father. And at the age of 15, during the war years, he couldn't take it anymore, and he ran away from the farm and made his way to England and made a life for himself there in the Midlands of England, in a lovely little town called Warwick. That's where they settled, and that's where we grew up. And it was actually a lovely place to grow up in, and a strong Irish community there, revolving around the church and the pub. But I think we were fortunate to land up in that place, although I don't know why I've gone straight into all my struggles and issues, but I still struggle to balance that sense of who I am, my identity within the Irish and the English world.
Yeah, I mean, it strikes me that often the journey of migration is a never-ending one in terms of like the ripple impact on those that come forward, and then even your own son, for instance, who we might mention later on. You know, there's an Irishness, there's mixed identities, and I suppose like we hear a lot about Irish America, and we don't hear it in the same frame, almost like Irish English or British English or British Irish. But I suppose it's the kind of reconciling of identity and how does identity form, and then does it ever solidify? I don't know. And then now we're into a new phase of ethno-nationalism almost, where people have fixed notions of identity that, at least I would argue, often are slightly outdated perhaps, and dangerous even.
Yeah, a lot to unravel there. I think I'll respond by saying that there was a long struggle. So in England, I would always be the Paddy, the Irishman, the Paddy, the Mick, whatever. And then as soon as I'd come back to my family in Ireland, I'd be the Englishman. And I used to rail against both. But over the years, I gradually become more comfortable in that middle space between the two. Previously, I wanted to claim that very Irish identity and be recognised in both places. But a few years ago, I realised there was a power and an insight in that liminal space between the two, if I could learn to sit comfortably between the two, because it gives you a dual perspective and maybe a greater insight into both. So that's what I'm currently working with.
I love that. If you don't mind sharing, maybe what were some of the elements that helped you come to that realization?
I think it's a lot to do with the work that we all do individually when our culture has been transposed and translated to another country, and just looking to how I come to terms with it. And in some of the more esoteric areas I've worked in over the years, I was introduced to this idea of the liminal space, this other. But so, you know, we can be very binary between it's the UK, it's Ireland, it's America, it's wherever. But then once you let go of the rigidity of those two geographical or cultural concepts, you realize there is a third space that lies between the two, which constitutes you. And I think that's it, Rory. I think recognizing that both those elements were in me, not just the one individual one, but there was a combination. And so I think what I've been working towards is the way I integrate those. And there are times when I slip out of that and go, no, I want to be there, so I want to be the other. If I walk into a shop in the town here, they go, oh, you're English, aren't you? And my first reaction is, well, I'm whoever you want me to be, rather than, no, I'm Irish.
Yeah, English by virtue of an accent, I suppose, is what's been suggested there. And then we take some of the music you're surrounded by and the music that you make, it's steeped and it is Irishness defined in many ways. And it's long been the case that many of the great exponents of Irish culture, tradition, music happen to not be born on this piece of soil. So we can end up, and it's particularly strange then we end up with a fixed notion of Irishness for a country so dependent on diaspora, and like the world has given us so much, and then we've given the world back, and yet haven't fully landed with a full acceptance almost.
Yeah. I think that's a very good way to describe it. But anyway, yeah, I'm happy.
Good, good. Well, that's the main thing, because I'm thinking we're pulling back layers of an onion here that we could be here for
a long time,
for days, weeks, and centuries, and they never get reconciled. So maybe talk to me a little bit about where music first entered your life, and in what form, and what taste and shape.
I'll go back to that reference to the cheap Chinese harmonica. I've no idea where it came from, how it came into my life, but I can remember there was a phase in my life around about the age of 7 years old, and we had to walk about a mile to the school. And for some reason, I had this Chinese harmonica, and I used to walk to school and walk back, just marching through the streets merrily playing this harmonica. And I think that was my first engagement with playing an instrument. I used to visit my grandmother's farm, and occasionally she would take out the melodeon and play a few tunes. But I almost don't have the words for it, Rory. It just feels like a magnetic pull throughout my entire life that I've been drawn to music. And again, another interesting awakening a few years ago. I was on some kind of a workshop for a few days, and I woke up one morning and I suddenly had the realization, it's not just music that I'm drawn to, it's sound. And that was interesting, separating the two. And what I found over the years, that I was drawn, in the early years, I was kind of drawn to competence in whatever instrument I was asked to play or stumbled upon. But central to everything that has deep meaning to me is the particular sound that the instrument makes, and the level of emotion and what I can evoke from that sound. So I think you're probably aware that of the many instruments I play, that one of the closest ones to my heart is the uilleann pipes. And I can remember the day that I first heard them, and there was something inside me, like an internal GPS, that just turned towards that, and I found myself being dragged in that direction. So and with the pipes, there's a primal, mythic, haunting, and romantic sound in there, and it was a very visceral response within me, just being drawn to that.
Mm-hmm. Could you speak more about what do you think it was speaking to in you? Like, what was it like a longing, or was it it sounds like that romantic notion, but is that like the mystical quality?
I think it probably is mystical and mythic. One of the important journeys for me growing up in the UK was the coming back to Ireland, and particularly whenever I go back to the Dingle Peninsula, and I'm driving around visiting various members of my family, and I look at the landscape, I can almost feel like these physical hooks just coming into my chest and dragging me, and it really is as tangible as that. So, and if when I'm in the UK and I'm trying to describe the Irish experience to people who have the ears to listen, I always talk about the mythic and the mystic nature in the west of Ireland. So I think I have a deep sense of that within me, and I think the route that I've gone with the music has spoken to that and has fed that. You know, they come together very, very naturally, and I haven't questioned it, and I haven't tried to make logical sense of it. I've just followed that path.
Mm. So from the mouth organ then, as a young guy, like where did music take you then? What came next? Was it did you get into rock and roll, or where did you end up as a teenage guy?
I was for some crazy reason, I did very, very well in a kind of a music pop quiz at school, and as a result of that, the school were just got the funding to buy instruments for the first orchestra, and they said, because you did so well in this test, and I never excelled in tests. This was really weird that I did so. I had to play recorder for a number of weeks, the almost like the tin whistle. So eventually I got a trumpet, and I love that. Trumpets are brass instruments. They're sexy. They sound great. And then I got my opportunity to join my first band, and it was a soul band. So we were playing 60s soul in the 60s, and we were around about 15, 16 years of age. And I have to be completely honest here as well. It was then that I realized that chicks dig musicians. And being on stage and being the center or the periphery of attention, I have to admit I kind of like that.
Well, yes, you're being very honest about it. And was there was this around the same time, or was it in time to come that you met your future wife, or was that some time to come, or was she someone who saw you strutting your stuff on stage?
Yeah, not at that stage. I think at this point it might be wise to move further.
Okay, well, you started it, Kieron.
Oh yeah, I realised that
bit that I might suggest we'll edit, but we're not going to edit it, Kieron. This is
no, this is real. This is cool.
Yeah, it's life in all its colour and bumps and lumps and shapes and sizes. Yeah, and it's a fact of life that when we're adolescent and there's certain draws, and that could be one of them. So from the soul band then, did you stick with it, or did you find your head being turned in other directions? You didn't get called into action in the ska movement or anything like that?
Yeah, we used to mix it up.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, so ska and blue beat, and then in fact, that's what we used to call early reggae, and then the name reggae started to creep in. So I did all of that, and then there was a long period where I was forced to work for my father in the building trade. I was supposed to start an apprenticeship as a mechanic in a local garage, but the day I was due to start there, I got up very early and got myself ready, and I headed to the door, and my father stood in front of me, and I thought, this is weird. And I tried to walk around him, and he physically stopped me leaving the building. And I said, my first day, Dad, I've got to go. And he just said, you're not going there. You're coming to work with me. So I had no choice in the matter. So I was literally press ganged into the building trade. And that was interesting and tough and character building. And then, I kind of knuckled down to hard work and had to leave the music behind because my father was insistent that he didn't want me to be involved in music. He was quite concerned that I wouldn't stick to the straight and narrow path, even though he had music in him, and his mother did too. And so there was quite a lot of unhappiness between us there that I wanted to follow that path. So there was a long period where there was no music, but eventually I found my way back again.
Mm-hmm. It sounded like very difficult, challenging years. That's from what, the age of 16, 17?
Yeah, from 16 through to the age of 20, and then I used the phrase, it was character building. There are parts of it, Rory, when I look back on it, I absolutely loved, and so we were navvies. It's interesting when the number of Irish people I speak to here that don't know that word. That it's what the English people used to call the Irish workers, navvies, the people who used to dig the canals. But we would be on the building sites doing all the rough work, and here come the navvies. I've lost my thread.
No, it's interesting to me that many Irish people wouldn't know that term, because for me it's synonymous with a lot of folk songs. Like it just is laced through so many folk songs, and you can't really understand Irish folk music without having some sense of that experience. It's
I couldn't agree more. And I met some incredible characters, men that I deeply, deeply admired, but I saw the dark side of their story, you know, where the only existence they had was on the building site and the pub, and both destroyed them in the end. So I loved the camaraderie. I loved that it built some capacity in me to endure and see things through. But there came to a point where I was really, really unhappy. I was really, really struggling, and I felt the draw to get an education. So I started going to what in those days they used to call night school, and I got the qualifications and went and did an English degree at the local university. And the day that I went to my father to say, "Dad, I'm leaving the business," our relationship was never the same again. And that was one of the hardest things I ever had to do. And I can still recall the expression on his face as I spoke these words, and the way he turned his back on me and walked away. So that was really, really tough. But I also recognized it was something I had to do. It was a really pivotal moment for me in my life.
Yeah, and that in formation terms is a large part of the kind of mythos of take the likes of the Joseph Campbell work or Robert Bly, and a lot of the kind of mythology in Greek or Norse or Irish is like the son at some point often has to confront the father, and you know, the rest is history in all our lives, is that there has to be a separation as such.
Yeah. I love the way you bring in Campbell and Bly, and Campbell more so. I've always been drawn to his hero's journey, and that model of the journey that we all must take to become who we're meant to be, as difficult as it is, has been really important. But it's also given meaning and structure and added sense to my own struggles.
Yeah, there's a great quote of his, and I'm conscious that these days so many quotes are misattributed, so I'm assuming that it is his quote indeed, but it's something along the lines of the cave you fear to enter holds the greatest treasure. You probably know that one, yeah.
I know it well, and there are times, and with all those little chunks of wisdom, sometimes they have more meaning as you move in your orbit of experience. Sometimes it has real concrete meaning, very resonant, and sometimes less so. But it is one that comes back into my orbit regularly, and I don't know why I'm throwing this one in, but a couple of years ago, I think I was reading Marcus Aurelius, and this hit. I'd read it so many times before, but it hit me like a ton of bricks. Because, you know, sometimes, like, I guess what I'm saying is sometimes they have more meaning, sometimes they have less. And it was the one where he says, whatever stands in the way is the way.
The way, yeah.
And I was going through a tough time. And again, that helped my understanding and sort of sense making around, hey man, sometimes the journey's got to get tough, you know, as Campbell would say.
Yeah, and it just seems to be innate in the human experience. Yeah. There ain't nobody getting out of here alive.
Spoiler alert, yeah.
Yeah. So you sound like you're quite a philosophical guy, and you mentioned esoterics. Like at some point, you obviously started looking around and looking above and under and thinking like, what's it all about? And at what point did those kind of sensibilities kick in?
There was again an innate sense, an intuitive sense that there was something more than what I was being shown and what was being revealed. And again, you know, my issues around the Catholic Church, whenever I made inquiries like that, it was, you wouldn't understand, and besides, you don't need to know. That's above your pay grade. But there was a sense of something else, and then as I was kind of, you know, going back into education as a mature student, a friend of mine said, I'm going to a talk on meditation this evening. And I said, I don't care where it is or what time it is, I am coming with you to that talk on meditation. And that introduced me to Eastern spirituality and Eastern philosophy. And it was an instantaneous thing, a recognition that was something in there that was meaningful and important to my path, and my awareness and growing consciousness around greater spirituality and philosophy started there, and it's ongoing today.
So is it kind of like, I suppose that's the way it is in life. Many times it's a happenstance almost, where somebody mentioned something and you responded, it spoke to you at that particular juncture.
Totally. And as I was thinking about this conversation today, I got thinking or recognizing how important those little synchronicities in life are. I'm a huge fan of Jung's work, particularly the work he did around synchronicity. And there have been so many in my life, and that was one. As my friend spoke it, I knew I was supposed to be there. But those little experiences that have crystallized, without any aid from myself, these little things have just materialized in front of me, and they make complete sense at that time. And then further down the road, if you turn around and look back to where you've been, you can see it as a really important fork in your life, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You rarely see them, if ever, until like later on down the road in hindsight or retrospectives and so on.
There are some. There was a few years ago, actually, just as we were coming into COVID, part of that inner hankering for sound and expression and connection through music was speaking to me. And I'd had an experience at my friend's olive grove on the Pelion Peninsula in Greece, where somebody played a piece of music, and I said to him, I don't know what just happened, but in a way, I know you've changed my life. And the piece of music that he played was the great duduk master from Armenia, Jivan Gasparian, and he played this instrument, the Armenian duduk. And so I sat with it for a long while, and I thought it would be crazy for me to venture into another area to learn yet another instrument. I may send you photographs of the instruments that are surrounding me, and it might make sense then. But eventually, this drive within me led me to do some research, and I found a guy that would offer duduk lessons online. So we did a Zoom call just like this, and from the moment we started speaking, we became friends. And after an hour, he said to me, so Kieron, you are Irish, you play Irish music, you live in Ireland. Why the hell do you want to play the duduk? And I mumbled a bit. There's that. And when I was doing my ethnomusicology masters at UL, I'd done some research on Armenian music and on this instrument. And I mentioned this to him, and then there was a pause, because I said, and there was a Turkish guy in the department who was studying there, who was a great source of knowledge for this instrument, which I didn't know so well. And he said, what was his name? And I said, his name was Ozan Chul. And he smiled. I said, why are you smiling? He said, he is my best friend, and your duduk came from me. So these little synchronicities can be just little, almost meaningless moments that you hardly notice as they go by your peripheral vision. But this one just hit me straight here. And I knew straight away that this was an instrument that I had to pursue. Amazing. And it's been an amazing journey with him. He's a remarkable individual. And I'm so glad, Rory, that I answered that call, because a part of me was thinking, it's crazy, you're already doing too much. And I played the uilleann pipes and other things.
Yeah.
But what this has helped me do is move on. The pipes drew me to that expression and that emotion that is innate within the sound of the pipes. And what I'm finding with the duduk, it's taking that even further. And at my core, that's what I seek, that emotion and expression, and that the music would say something about my heart to the hearts that are listening.
Beautiful. Going back here and then to that difficult time when leaving your dad's work and the relationship challenges, and then you're essentially building your own life, and what form did that take? And then presumably music sort of re-entered at some point then.
Yeah. So when I eventually left my father's business, I entered an English degree, a 4-year English degree, and I would come out eventually with a teaching degree. Now that was tough in the way that my wife had to be the breadwinner then, and she supported me through that time, and also our one and only child, Luke, was on the scene. So it was a bit tight to navigate that on one wage. But we did, and years later I recognized how fortunate it was for me, because normally in families' arcs, or used to be the norm, the father would be the breadwinner and the mother would get the time with the children. But I realized I was given 4 precious years of being the guy who took his son to school and did all that thing. And I didn't realize it at the time, Rory, but it was a very, very special time. So after that, eventually, after the education and then going into teaching, I got a phone call from an old friend who said that they'd got a soul band and they needed a trumpet player. And so that dragged me back in there. But at the same time, I was embarking on my journey into trad music and starting with tin whistle. Because I'd heard the pipes, I started with the tin whistle, knowing that would be the starter, the feeder instrument into the pipes. So that was that kind of part.
And so the trad then, was that in the context of an Irish community? Was that like Sunday afternoons in pubs type thing, or, Tuesday evenings, or that sort of thing?
Well, it started with the regular visits back to Ireland and witnessing the glories of the session. Just people getting together from all walks of life, having a pint and sitting down, singing songs and playing tunes. But the way it kind of coalesced with me was that one thing I left out many years ago, my 2 brothers and myself were in a kind of a punk band.
Okay, you definitely can't buy it.
But anyway, so he wasn't doing anything, and I said, look, this is what I'm doing. Why don't we get together? And he wasn't sure at first, because he was still kind of locked into the rock and roll route. But eventually he came around to the idea of playing acoustic music. And then we started going to local pubs and playing with the local musicians in England till 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. And the rest is history, as they say. So that was very, very important for he and I. He was my big brother, but I think it formed a much deeper bond between us, because we were growing into and sharing that music together and growing within it as musicians.
Wow! So there's a lot going on there. There's bit of punk, bit of ska, soul, trad. You can't. Yeah. No one can say that you're monodisciplinary. You definitely have kept and still do a very broad ear, and I suppose like that genre we call world music. Maybe we just call it music. You're just interested in music.
Entirely. And during the years when I was teaching in full-time education, we had a visitor from the education department. It was called the intercultural arts or something. So what they tended to do was to go into schools that were very white, middle class and privileged, and to try and bring some diversity in. And they'd said, this guy's going to come in and work with your kids. And from the moment this guy entered the school, I was beguiled by his every move, his every word, and everything he did with these children. And at the end of the day, he'd done this production where the kids all wore these incredible costumes. They did this dance. Some of them were strumming a sitar, and others were playing the tanpura, and others were playing the harmonium. And it was utterly magical. And I said, we have to work together. And we found so much commonality between Indian classical music and Indian popular music and film music. And we formed this little band that we call the Gods of Sound and Stone. I'm sure you know where that comes from. And we had an amazing time working together for many, many years. And as chance would have it, last week I was in the UK, and now he is retired, and he spends his evenings playing the sitar in the local Indian restaurants. And I went along to this place and surprised him, and we sat there for about an hour playing together, and it was just incredible. But again, this crazy blend of the Irish traditional music that spoke to me, and finding this crossover. And sometimes he would be playing a melody, and I'm saying, "What is this you're playing?" And he said, "This is an old Indian." I said, "No, we have that in our tradition." And we ended up playing for the Aga Khan's the Aga Khan's daughter, Princess Sarah, her 21st birthday party. And 2 times we were invited to play for, as he was then, Prince Charles, which was culturally it just seems so weird that we're invited into all these places with this crazy mix of what we're doing. But it was a very special time, and this man has a really special place in my heart as a human being and as a musician.
Well, what's really coming to mind there is the beauty of not just music, but humans through music. And if we can find our shared commonality and connection, and we're better together and bigger together. Because as we speak, there's a lot of division, separateness, this culture is better than that culture, so on and so forth. And, just music and traditions coming together and benefiting from both. And as it happens, 2 previous guests on this podcast, you probably know one or both of them, Matthew Noon and Tommy Hayes, had a group on Tara, or have a group where it's Irish and Indian also. And then Matthew's Australian, but am I remembering that he's Irish-Australian? I think he has Irish roots. Maybe he doesn't. I can't remember. I'll need to re-listen to that episode myself. But again, like, there they are in East County Clare making Indian and Irish music, fusions.
Yeah, and another crazy crossover there is I was at UL at the same time as Matthew, and we were working from kind of similar areas. And then when we revived, we were very much part of the house concert movement in the UK, and we decided to start doing it again here once we got into our own house. And Matthew and Tommy were our first guests at our.
Oh, they performed in your house?
Yes.
Yeah, excellent. Wow. Lovely. Maybe tell me a bit more about the house concert movement and how you got started in that.
Well, some of the stuff we haven't talked about, we've already introduced Luke, who's the common ground between us. My son Luke introduced me to your work and to you and Susie. So eternally grateful to him for that. Well, we were still in the UK, and Luke and his musical partner, John Parker, were evolving as fiercely talented musicians. And we he'd been studying down in Brighton, and he was introduced to a guy called Paul Chi, who's often seen as the guy responsible for creating this movement of putting on gigs in people's homes. And so I went and played with Luke and John at a few of those gigs in Brighton, and we just fell in love with the whole process, Rory. So we started doing them at our home in Leamington Spa, and there's all the things that you've talked about so far, the way music can touch and heal and connect and bring diverse people and cultures together, that's exactly what we found was happening with the house concerts. And another interesting aspect of it as well is that it creates a great space for new artists to develop their own personality and their craft without the pressures of being in the commercial premises, pubs and clubs, which definitely have their place. But it was interesting that as we moved into the mainstream of the music industry in the UK, a lot of the major labels started copying some of the things that we were doing. And originally, house concerts were looked at places for no-hopers to play, people who couldn't cut it in the commercial world of pubs and clubs. That wasn't the case. But they watched what we were doing. And in fact, one of the journalists from The Guardian did a huge article on hosting a concert in her apartment in London where Luke and John played. But even the major labels started saying, there's a lot more to this than at first we realized. So they took some of their new artists who weren't really comfortable in those commercial settings and put them into house concert environment to give them a chance to learn and to grow, to learn how to talk to an audience as well.
Fascinating. Wow. So is this at the point then where things got more serious and you decided to, as I understand, like found a label and, really ramp things up?
Yeah, it was all around that time, and things came together quite organically. So Luke and John, as I said, we're really developing as incredible artists, and myself and my wife Sue, we were quite surprised because they'd been trudging through their early phases of music, playing in school bands and getting into heavy metal and stuff. But then eventually they said, we're just going to do a two-man thing. So Luke would play guitar and sing. John Parker would play the double bass and human beatbox. Quite an unorthodox pairing, really. But once they found that groove and they locked into it, and they just exploded into this incredible act. And having been a musician and been around the music industry and seen some of the fallout of artists who'd been mishandled and misled by the mainstream industry, I suggested that we put a little bit of support structure around them and to help protect them and their music. And we also said that we don't want to do this mom and dad, coming in and controlling. And when we put it to them, they said, please come in, we need all the help we can get. So that seemed to evolve very quickly into creating an entity that became an independent record label.
Wow. So very organic in lots of ways.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that was the important part about it, Rory, rather than as we find ourselves moving into the mainstream, rather than everything being constructed and maybe having some artifice to it, which tends to creep in around mainstream music and music that's meant for the charts. Looking back on it, that organic nature, and also within the family, but also being very conscious and being very tender and very respectful of the family roles and the musician roles as well. It's quite a minefield, and it took a lot of careful navigating. We didn't always get it right, but we certainly worked with a level of integrity around holding space for each of the roles.
So it's a real image of almost a cottage industry, DIY punk sensibility, grassroots approach, folk approach, and yet then the momentum. I shouldn't say and yet, but still the momentum grew and grew, and next thing you are kind of taking on the big guns effectively.
Yeah, and a strange set of circumstances around that, because as live performers, but Luke and John were very, very special, hugely exciting, but also they knew how to connect as individuals and with their music. And the music spoke to a lot of people. But one day Luke was home from university for a couple of days, and he was in a songwriting phase. And I was working on a computer doing something. He came to me and he said, "Dad, I'm stuck for an idea. What should I write a song about?" Now, the irony of Luke, who is an exceptional songwriter, asking me, I'm not a songwriter. I play a few tunes. I've written a few tunes, but I thought, I'm busy. How can I get him off my back? And I said, "Go away and write a song about diggers," half joking. And then he left the room. I thought, it worked. And not very long later, he returned with his guitar. He says, "Hey, I've got that song." And I'm in busy work mode. I'm saying, "What song?" He said, "The one that you said I should write." I'm like, "Oh, yeah." So then he proceeded to sing a song which encapsulated his journey, early journey through school and into music, and our relationship, because he had a very tough time at his first school because he was diagnosed with dyslexia, and the school really victimized and punished him. But he wrote this song that talked about our relationship, how I helped him then, and to jump forward a couple of years, that song eventually became a number one hit in the UK and in Ireland, sold 1 million records, and had a profound effect on everything we were doing. And we're proud of the achievement, but we had made a kind of a pact between the four of us at the label, which was Luke, John, Sue, and my wife, and myself. Those were the four pillars of the label. We'd said that we agreed that we would never release that song as a commercial record, as a single, because the British music press would misinterpret and label the band a novelty band, and that's exactly what happened. But we were backed into a corner. We were doing, as you say, the label was a cottage industry, very organic, very, very punky. So we were doing everything ourselves, and wherever we could, we'd try and scrape the money together to employ, jobbers to do different work for us. And a PR company led us up the garden path, led us to believe that we had radio interviews and everything happening. And one day in London at a meeting, all this just tumbled down and evaporated. So it left us flat broke and with nowhere to go. And we had a conversation about it, and we said, we've got nothing going for us apart from this song and a beautiful little animation that was created to go with it. And so we decided to go with it, and everything I just described happened, and there was good and there was bad around that.
So that's for people that want to check it out. It's the JCB song by Nizlopi, and the animation video, I believe, is on YouTube with possibly many millions of hits and views. Probably continues to circulate, doesn't it?
It does. It's really interesting, the longevity of the song and how it moved so many people. We used to get, in the early days, we put the little animation out first, and then we would get emails from people all over the world telling us how moving and how touched they were by this experience, because basically it's a father-son relationship. That's what the story revolves around, and of the father being protective of a son going through a really, really tough time, and for nothing that he did, but through a school that really did victimize him and give him a tough time because because of the dyslexia that was undiagnosed at that point.
So I suppose it links somewhat to our previous conversations about almost the shadow sides of things. There was a lot of light and dark, and obviously heaps of light in the situation there, blazing light, but also not without challenge as well. And I suppose that goes back to, this theme that we seem to have in this conversation around the journey of life and the ebbs and flows.
Yeah, well, you just said it there, man. The stronger the light, the darker the shadows. And wherever that light appears, there's always a shadow. And we had to deal with that and try and navigate it. And it made our lives very, very difficult. And in the end, it led to Luke needing an extended period on his own. And one of the things that Luke has always needed and is guided by is that time almost in the wilderness. It's not quite 40 days and 40 nights, but it's to get away and to travel and to meet people and to decompress from that situation. And so eventually the fallout from all that light and spotlight led to them taking the two guys to taking a break and eventually saying, well, we're putting this project to bed, and Luke needed to work on his solo stuff. And that was an important break, Rory, because then it gave him the chance to follow his own muse, which was more the activist route, which I know is something that you are only too well familiar with. So that gave him an opportunity as a solo artist to follow that and express his feelings more about what was happening in the world and maybe how we could heal the world too.
Absolutely. So I suppose this juncture, I'll give him a bit of a plug as well. Luke Concannon, people will find him on all the different platforms, and I'm always conscious that I'm promoting streaming platforms, and I also want to say, like, please, everyone, buy the music from the artist as well. But that's another conversation around the monetization of music, which has been a theme on this podcast, is that the arts can be a perilous, difficult road, but not always that. Also, I don't want to kind of paint it just into that corner that it has to be difficult and perilous, but it often comes with significant challenge.
Well, I was in great demand for a couple of years after that. So when anyone or a label, anyone gets a number one record, you draw a lot of attention, and a lot of people at the time chose not to believe what we were saying when we said we did this alone. And there's still an idea within mainstream music that there was a puppet master behind us, like a major record label. Now, all the major record labels ignored us in the early days and then suddenly wanted to be part of what we were doing. And we woke up one day and we realized, look, the tools there now, the digital tools that were growing, with social media and YouTube, we could actually do this ourselves. And it was almost as if the major labels were bugging at our meetings, because soon after that they were contacting us and saying, how can we be part of what you're doing? And we said, we really appreciate your incredibly kind offer, but we've decided to do it, this way. And they said, but we could give you money. I said, that's really nice, but it's not about the money. And generally their response was, well, we'll give you even more money. And then we'd have to say, I don't think you're listening. But yeah, that was that.
Fascinating. Yeah, the price of integrity in that is that, like, staying true, sticking to your guns, I suppose, in many ways.
Yeah. And there was an interesting, they were all interesting times, but I'm sure you're familiar with the work of Alistair McIntosh and his incredible book. Again, a book that was introduced to me through Luke.
Soil and Soul.
Soil and Soul, thank you. And Luke would often visit Alistair, and they became friends, and Alistair was his mentor, and they still work together and spend time together. Very important relationship for them. But that Luke and Alistair created a song and a piece of music, which is essentially the hero's journey. So that, when times get rough, and so maybe people want to check that out if you search for Luke Concannon and Alistair McIntosh. And if I recall properly, I think the piece is called Homage to Young Men.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah. And it's Alistair's reinterpretation of the journey, and he works with men, predominantly in recovery from drug and alcohol addiction. But he has a very, very beautiful song that they've done together, which creates that hero's journey and the story of the river and the rapids. But also, I think the important part in those stories, Rory, is that, okay, not just that things are getting rough, but things have to get rough. That it is part of the journey, and that's where part of the acceptance is that, yeah, it is going to get rough, and you are going to get, really badly beaten up, but that's just part of it,
Yeah, yeah. I suppose I'll seize this little pause for a commercial break and say that Alistair and Luke have been guests on my podcast. In fact, my very first time meeting Luke was for purposes of the podcast, not this Clare podcast that we're focused on here today, but the Love and Courage podcast. So people want to listen to more of that. It's Luke Concannon and Alistair McIntosh, separate episodes. But yeah, fond memories of both of those conversations. So end of the commercial break.
Good plug.
Back to the conversation with Kieron. Could you maybe fast forward a little bit, because I'm conscious we don't have a huge amount of time left, but maybe do take me a little bit further down the road then, and maybe to where, say, you mentioned doing a master's, and then, obviously you, at some point you've ended up in East Clare, but I'm sure there were many other little segues and highlights along the way. Is there anything you'd care to kind of touch on?
Yeah, well, if I could kind of do the highlights of that, the way we ended up in Clare and myself at UL was my wife had been very sick. She was dealing with 2 types of cancer. She went through very arduous treatment, but came out the other side, and still today is doing very, very well. And at the end of that that period, Sue and myself and Luke set aside a weekend to examine our lives and ask where we were and where we wanted to go with our lives. And I'm not sure whether you're familiar with this story, but I host a process called the Flow Game. It's something. It was a process that we used to use regularly within the record label to help discern how we could stay true to what we were doing musically and artistically. And it was just a tool that helped us find a way. So we took a weekend out and we used the Flow Game that all of us have used for many years. So we're very comfortable with the process. And at the end of it, this kind of route map of where we could move forward in our lives had just emerged very organically. So we moved to Ireland with the plan that I would do a master's at UL in ethnomusicology, and that Sue would create a ceramics studio where she would pursue the more creative side of her nature. And what was interesting about the ethnomusicology was that it gave me an opportunity to pursue something that I'd felt very, very strongly about my entire life, but I only put into words and sense making later, was to explore the nature of music and the aspects of the divine that I always felt I sensed through music that came from the right place. So I spent a year at UL doing that, had a remarkable time, surprised how hard they made me work. But again, very, very important that I was given time. Now, it wasn't particularly seen as deeply academic, because what I was looking at, talking about the divine and expanded consciousness, mainstream academia doesn't like the idea of altered states of consciousness, because they will tell you that there's not enough research done around it. But I didn't care. It just gave me a year to immerse myself in the process and learn a bit about other musics, meet great people like Tommy and Matthew, and discuss where they were coming from. And now we find ourselves here 10 years later, still in County Clare. And although I've only been living in Clare for 10 years, I've been visiting for 35 years, every year making my pilgrimage to Milltown and Malbay for the Willie Clancy Week. But in the 10 years since the Masters, another path of inquiry around aspects of the divine and the healing aspect of music. I have since become a certified sound healer, and then last year as well, I trained as a sound bath facilitator. I'm wondering how this sounds. But believe me, there's a thread that links it, and there is some sense here. And what I've realized around particularly the work I'm doing with the sound baths, it's suddenly given me a chance to bring all these instruments that I'm surrounded by into a sonic scape, for people to relax and to heal or whatever. And my whole life, I've examined the art of performance and where music comes from. And in the early days, particularly if I was playing solo, I'd get really anxious and nervous and wonder about how I deal with that and how I process it. But another aspect of my life that we haven't touched upon is a lifelong engagement with martial arts, and particularly the Japanese sword and the art of iaido, which is it's like a moving meditation using a sword in a solo process. But all that work that I'd done within the martial arts it led me to discover dynamic action whilst still in stillness and spaciousness. And the work I've done with meditation speaks to those as well. So as I developed the art of performance and moving from being hugely anxious and uncomfortable in the process of moving towards a space which I called a cross between the idea of music space and warrior space. So in martial arts, when you step up to perform something or just to be seen, I have this idea of these two. Now, for me, they have come together. That music space and warrior space are the same place. And when I used to have to perform at gradings in England with the Japanese sword, there was always that trepidation, like before you played solo. And what I found was that I could access a space, a stillness, where the concern about playing wrong notes or just fucking up just disappeared. In fact, I'd go so far as to say that sometimes it feels like a space where there are no wrong notes. And that's been very, very powerful for me. And aspects of that are what are feeding into the work I'm doing in the sound baths. And I don't think the sound bath field is not a natural area for people who just want to be performers, because it's very, very different. So accessing that warrior space, that music space, that space where everything flows from, that's what I seek from the very first note that I play as we enter the sound bath space.
Wow. Well, that sounds like you've encapsulated so much in that last sentence. It's almost like you're divining into the divine. And in many ways, that for me captures so much of what I hear about art and why people are drawn to art, is that it's something transformational, but also transcendent.
You've nailed it there beautifully. That has, and what I didn't realize is that from the very earliest days that there was these elements inside that were trying to move to that, and it's only so far down this very, very long path of mine where it started to come together and makes total sense. And it feels, I was working with Luke and Alistair at Iona Abbey in the Hebrides a few weeks ago, and I hosted a sound bath there at the Abbey, and there was a moment at particular parts of the process I will actually move around the resting bodies on the floor, and there was a little moment almost where I caught my breath, because I was witnessing my own process of creating this space and the sonics, to draw people into a restful place. And I think maybe it's like in the early days when someone's, learning and practicing to be a magician, and they finally get a magic trick right. And it was, oh shit, this is really working, And it was a lovely little moment that was kind of pulling me out of the moment. But then just going, yeah, but just don't make it about you. Once it becomes about you, I think you're utterly screwed. So I think I'd finish by saying that my feeling about music and creativity, and I know this was shared between the four of us at the record label and the other people that eventually worked with us, that it isn't about us as the performer, that we are just fortunate enough to be the conduit or the hollow reed that flows through. And it's about getting the right resonance for that flow to come through. End of lecture.
Fantastic. Well, you ended on a beautiful note there. So I'm not going to say anything further that might take away from the depths of what you've just shared. And it's been a real privilege to hear some of your own journey and to hear the journey as a family that you've been on with Sue and with Luke and John and everyone else involved. And great to hear that you still have that, like, it sounds like you haven't just climbed up any particular mountain and sat on a plateau looking at the view. You've continued to seek and search and explore, and it's inspiring. So thanks so much, Kieron, and it's been a pleasure.
I can't tell you what a joy it is to speak with you always, Rory, but to hear your insights and your questions. It's been a great honour. So thank you, Sam.
Thank you, Kieron. Thank you.